What's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to get hit with the truth. Doing my final 2021 True Boxing Award, and this is for the Fighter of the Year. One of my favorite awards, hands down. You know, I mean, to me, it's the top award to declare the best fighter in boxing from any year. Any calendar year is huge. You know, last year I forget who my Fighter of the Year was off the top of my head. It might have been Tyson Fury for his win over Deontay Wilder. You know, there was a lot of good candidates last year. I believe it was Tyson Fury. But this year, boxing went back to, you know, normalcy to an extent after COVID. And we had some good candidates for this award this year. So, again, 122 to heavyweight. I'm going to give my top 3 candidates in each division. And then I will have my top 10 for the year. So let's start with 122. And number 3, I gave it to Murajan Akhmadaliev, the unified super bantamweight champion. He entered the year as a unified champ and as the number 1 fighter in division after upsetting the previous number 1 Daniel Roman. And he had a lot to prove. And in his first fight, he proved a bit by, you know, defeating former champ Ryosuke Iwasa by a 5th round TKO. Later in the year, he was supposed to fight Ronnie Rios. Rios had to pull out with COVID, and he took on replacement Jose Velasquez. He, you know, it was competitive, but he won a one-sided competitive decision. Had to work harder than expected. He ended up going 2-0. I got him at number 3 on the year. Number 2 goes the former champ Brandon Figueroa. Figueroa came out and knocked out Luis Neri impressively in May to capture the WBC title, big time win, and then fought his ass off in defeat against Stephen Fulton Jr. in November in a title unification bout between Undefeateds, and really put his ass on the line. He lost a very close majority decision, but he outlanded and outpunched what's his name, Stephen Fulton. So I gave him number 2 for that. But number 1, Stephen Fulton Jr. 2-0 on the year. He started the year off against Angelo Leo undefeated and got a way more convincing than expected 12-round unanimous decision over Leo. Then he took on Brandon Figueroa, who was the bigger name in a title unification bout and unified belt. So in 2 fights, he captured 2 belts, beating 2 undefeated fighters impressively. Have to give him Super Bantamweight of the Year honors. Stephen Fulton Jr., congrats. 126, number 3, I went with Mauricio Lara. Lara went 1-0 on the year with 1 no contest, but his win was a monster one, beating down and knocking out previously undefeated former champ Josh Warrington. Big time win for Lara, big upset. He might have been higher on the list if he would have beat Warrington in a rematch, but they ended up fighting to a technical draw in only 2 rounds, and that, you know, that didn't lead to much. We didn't have a final result to leave no doubt. So number 3 for him. Number 2, Kiko Martinez. This guy came out of nowhere and knocked out Kid Galahad to capture the IBF title. He had lost earlier in the year to Zelfa Barrett and got another win. He ended up going 2-1 overall, but a big upset over Kid Galahad to capture the IBF featherweight title. Big time win. Galahad was sitting at the top of the division. So I got to give Kiko Martinez number 2 honors. But number 1 featherweight of the year goes to reigning WBO champion Emmanuel Navarrete. He entered the year with the WBO title, and he took on Christopher Diaz, the always tough fighter from Puerto Rico, and dominated him. I thought it was going to be a competitive bout, and it just wasn't. He dominated Diaz over 12 rounds and stopped him in the 12th round impressively. And then in October, he made a mandatory defense against top 10 guy Joet Gonzalez, and I thought it was going to be a competitive fight here, and it was. He had to work hard, but he busted up Joet Gonzalez and got a deserving, hard-fought but deserving decision to retain his title, and just an impressive and dominant year. So I gave Emmanuel Navarrete the honor of featherweight of the year at 126. 130, number 3, I went with Shavkat Rakhimov, undefeated contender. In February, he took on a heavy Jojo Diaz for the vacant IBF title after Diaz missed weight and missed it by a lot. And most people thought when the fight went forward that Diaz was gonna handle Rakhimov and stay undefeated but not be the champion. And Rakhimov had a different thing in mind. He went out there and went right at Diaz. It was a great back and forth fight. They went toe to toe, but it ended up being a draw. And that was one thing. Rakhimov returned later in the year, dominated an unnamed opponent or an unknown opponent, but I gave him number 3 honors for that. Number 2, I went with Shakur Stevenson. He took on Jeffrey, I forget the guy's name, not Dabila, I think, in June. No surprise, he got a, kind of workmanlike 12-round decision. But then in October, he would take on Jermel Charlotte in the biggest fight of his career. He was a mandatory challenger, and he would dominate Jermel Charlotte. Just absolutely pick him apart and dominate him. He was mean, he was aggressive, and he busted him up and beat him up and stopped him in the 10th round. Big win for Shakur Stevenson. Really proved that he's not just a pure boxer with the dominant performance over Herring. But the super featherweight of the year, I got to go with Oscar Valdez. In March, he scored a monster win, or February, I'm sorry, dominating and knocking out Miguel Berchelt, who was sitting at the top of the division for the last 3 years. And he absolutely destroyed Miguel Berchelt from start to finish, left no doubt. So, and then in September, he had a questionable, controversial, unanimous decision over Robson Kensaichau, but he closed the fight strong in that one. But just the effect of the knockout of Berchelt, the dominance and knockout of Berchelt, really won him this award. Super featherweight of the year goes to Oscar Valdez. 135 lightweight. Number 3, Vasily Lomanchenko, the former unified champ, our former 3-division champion. I mean, this guy, he returned after the loss to Teofimo Lopez. In June, he would take on Masahiro Nakatani. A lot of people thought, because Nakatani was big, he was coming off the knockout of Felix Verdejo, that he was going to give Lomachenko a challenge, but Lomachenko was fucking mean. He came out there and dominated Nakatani with ease, picking him apart and stopped him impressively in the 9th round of that fight and left no doubt. Then in December, he returned and took on former champion Richard Comey, who was still a top 10 lightweight, and dominated Comey, almost knocked him out in the 7th round, dominated him over 12 one-sided rounds, and kept himself established as the number 1 contender at lightweight right now. So he had a nice year. Number 2, I went with Devin Haney. Devin Haney really surprised a lot of people this year. In I believe it was May, he got a hard-fought unanimous decision over Linares. The only reason I say it was hard-fought is he had to hold on at the end, but he really picked Linares apart and outboxed him for 9.5 rounds before he got caught cold in the 10th and hurt badly. He had to hold on. I felt like he should have been penalized, but he still outboxed Linares and got away with a clean unanimous decision. And then in December, he returned against Joseph Diaz and just dominated Diaz over 12 rounds. He used his height and reach and outworked Diaz. Diaz was in the fight. It was a good fight. I had it like 8 rounds to 4, but Devin Haney just was convincing and left no doubt and retained his WBC title. He beat 2 very good lightweights. Lightweight is one of the best divisions in boxing, and he had a very good year. You could argue him for number 1, but number 1 for me, I had to give it to George Camposos. He only fought once, but it was a huge win, defeating Teofimo Lopez by split decision to capture the unified title. Just as a monumental upset for Camposos right here, and I got to give him the award for lightweight of the year. 140 junior welterweight. Number 3, Montana Love. Montana Love came out of nowhere in August, and knocked out Ivan Berianchik, the former champ, who was in the fight of the year last year against Jose Sepeda. Knocked him out in the 7th round in an upset, and kind of surprised some people. Came out of nowhere. That was a big win. I think he went 2-0 on the year. So, you know, Montana Love gets number 3. Number 2, I went with Jose Sepeda. He went 2-0 on the year as well. Kind of had a so-so decision win against Hank Lundy. That people were kind of like, well, maybe still feeling the effects from the fight of the year and against Ivan Barianchik last year. But he left no doubt where he stands in this division in October when he took on Josue Vargas and caught him fucking cold in the first round, especially since the odds makers had made Vargas the favorite. And again, I've said this before, he said there's levels to this, and he went out there and proved it, knocking out Josue Vargas in the first round impressively. That got him number 2 on the year. But number 1, without question, the undefeated, undisputed champion, Josh Taylor. He only fought one time when he unified all 4 belts against Jose Ramirez, but he became only the 6th man in the 4-belt era to become a 4-belt undisputed champion. Almost knocked Ramirez out in that fight and walked away with a deserving unanimous decision as he became an undisputed champion. A huge win right there. Absolutely the junior welterweight of the year, Josh Taylor. 147 welterweight. Number 3, I went with Jaron Ennis. Ennis had a couple nice wins this year. He went in there against Sergey Lipinets in February and surprised some people. It was February or March, and he knocked the fuck out of Lipinets in only 6 rounds and left no doubt that he belongs in the top 10 and he's going straight up to the top. Then he returned, I believe in October, November. He took on Thomas Delorme and knocked Delorme out surprisingly in the first round. A little bit questionable because the first punch was a behind the head shot, not intentional, but he still knocked out a very quality fighter in Delorme in the first round and Lipinets. He deserves to be number 3. Number 2, Yordenis Ugas. He started the year, I think he made an optional defense and dominated somebody earlier in the year. I think it might have been Mike Dallas Jr. And then followed it up, though, with an impressive unanimous decision in his career best win over Manny Pacquiao. Dominated him outboxed him over 12 rounds. Left no doubt number 2 on the year. But number 1, I got to go with Terence Crawford for his 10th round TKO. He only fought one time. 10th round TKO victory over Sean Porter. It was just such a big fight, a lot at stake, and the fact that he could finish off a guy that is tough as nails in Sean Porter was impressive. Welterweight of the year, Terence Bud Crawford. Super welterweight, 154. Number 3, I gave it to Jermel Charlotte. He only fought one time, and when he attempted to unify all 4 belts against Brian Castano, great fight. He won rounds early, hurt Castano. Castano won most of the middle rounds, and then Charlo turned it around in the 9th and ended up winning the last 3 rounds. And that just set the stage right there. So the fight ended in a draw. It was his only fight of the year, but it was a very good action-packed fight. He gets number 3. Number 2, I gave it to Tim Tszyu from Australia. This guy ended up going 3-0, I believe. He dominated Dennis Hogan earlier in the year, who was a former world title challenger, dominated him with a 5th round TKO, got another win in between against a nobody, but then he took on former world title challenger Takashi Inoue and dominated him. He went the distance for his first time, but dominated him over 12 rounds. One-sided unanimous decision. Tim Tszyu, number 1 contender now. He's number 2 on the year. 154 though, the super welterweight of the year, undefeated WBO champion Brian Castano. He entered the year, went against Patrick Teixeira in a fight that a lot of people thought was going to be competitive, and he dominated Patrick Teixeira from start to finish. He really did. Outworked him, outclassed him, took shots, kept coming forward, and got a clean one-sided 12-round decision over Teixeira to become the WBO champion. Then he followed that up against Jermel Charlotte, came in the underdog to unify all 4 belts and become an undisputed champion, and he got hurt early, then seemingly outworked Charlo for the majority of the middle rounds, and then Charlo turned it around in the last 3 rounds, and it was close, but I myself and most people had Castano winning a close decision, but he came up with a draw. But what a performance for Castano on the year. He is my super welterweight of the year at 154. 160 middleweight, kind of hard to choose. Number 3, I gave it to Demetrius Andre, the undefeated WBO champion. He didn't wow everybody. His opponent weren't great. He went 2-0. He defeated Liam Williams by a convincing unanimous decision, knocked him down early, but Williams closed the fight strong. Andre just looked like he was out there to win a decision, and then he went out there and blitzed Jason Quigley in 2 rounds and knocked him out. Impressive win, but Quigley's a nobody. You know, he's not a big name, and that's what he should have done. So I gave him number 3 honors at 160. Number 2, I gave it to Jaime Munguia. Munguia fought twice. He took on replacement opponent Primislav Saleta in June, and you know, Saleta had fought, I believe, like 6 months earlier, had fought Triple G and went 7 rounds with him. And Jaime Munguia went in there and knocked him out in 6 rounds, impressively, on short notice. So that was impressive. But then he fought Gabriel Rosado, who had upset Bektamir Melikuziev at 168, fought Danny Jacobs a year before to a split decision, a controversial loss. So a lot of people thought if anybody could give him a good test, it's Gabe Rosado. And Munguia dominated Rosado over 12 rounds, scoring a one-sided 12-round decision in that one. Looked very good. So he's number 2. But my middleweight of the year goes to Kazakh-style Janibek Alimkhanuly, who was undefeated and came out of nowhere, took on Rob Brandt earlier in the year, dominated Rob Brandt, dominated him, just kept pressing forward, put the pressure on him, 9th round TKO. And then later in the year, he took on Hassan Nadam, the former champion, and did what you're supposed to do against a faded former champ. He dominated him as well, scoring an 8th round TKO in that one as he stayed undefeated. So Kazakh-style Janibek Alimkhanuly is my middleweight of the year at 160. 168, number 3, I gave it to David Morrell, the WBA regular champion. He went 2-0, had a couple nice wins, defeating Mario Cazares, and then by a first-round knockout, stopped veteran Alontes Fox with a 4th round TKO. He stayed undefeated, making himself a player at 168. Number 2, David Benavidez. He took on Ronald Ellis earlier in the year, dominated him, stopped him in the 11th round of that fight, stayed undefeated. Then he took on Kyrone Davis, who was a replacement opponent for Jose Ustadegui. And it was an action-packed fight, but he pressed forward and just walked through Kyrone Davis and whatever Davis was throwing back at him and scored a 7th round TKO in that one, stayed undefeated. But absolutely the super middleweight of the year without question is Canelo Alvarez. He went out there and dominated 3 different opponents. He dominated Avni Yildirim, 3rd round TKO in a mandatory fight to retain his unified title. Then he went out there against Billy Joe Saunders. It was competitive for a while. Saunders won himself some rounds. But Canelo kept pressing forward and kept getting closer. And then a brutal left uppercut broke the orbital bone of Billy Joe as Canelo scored the TKO victory and unified 3 belts. And then in November, he attempted to become the 7th man in history to unify all 4 belts and become an undisputed champion. Also the first ever Mexican undisputed champion in history, any era. And he dominated Caleb Plant. You know, Plant was in the fight. He won some rounds, but Canelo kept coming. He kept stalking. He kept landing shots, kept breaking down Caleb Plant. And that was exactly what it was. He just broke him down, stopped him impressively in the 11th round, and became the undisputed champion. So he is the super middleweight of the year by far. 175. Number 3, I gave it to Anthony Yarde. Yarde got a win earlier in the year. He bounced back off the loss to Lyndon Arthur. He got a win earlier in the year, and then he got the rematch with Lyndon Arthur with the winner to take on the winner of Joe Smith Jr. and Callum Johnson this year in 2022. And Anthony Yarde did not disappoint. He went right at Lyndon Arthur in the rematch, was aggressive, was mean, and he stopped him impressively in the 4th round, leaving no doubt that he was the better man between the two. And now he pushes forward towards a title shot, went 2-0. He's number 3 on the year. Number 2 is Joe Smith Jr. He only fought once, but it was a big win. It was a hard-fought victory over Maxime Vlasov to capture the vacant WBO light heavyweight championship. Big win for Joe Smith as he sets himself up for bigger fights in the future. But the light heavyweight of the year, I went with the unified undefeated champion, Arthur Beterbiev, who went 2-0. He made an IBF mandatory defense against Adam Dines in, I believe it was March. Dominated him, broke him down. I think it was a 9th or 10th round stoppage. You could tell he was a little rusty. But in December, he followed that up and made another mandatory defense against the talented Marcus Brown, and he just grinded it out. He took a bad cut in the middle of his forehead, but then weathered that and just broke down a very talented Marcus Brown and stopped him in the 9th round of that fight to retain his unified light heavyweight title. Light heavyweight of the year, the unified champion, Arthur Beterbiev. Cruiserweight, 200 pounds. Number 3, I gave it to Badu Jack. And the reason why is Jack made his debut, and he's a big name for this division. He made his debut. He fought over light heavyweight. It wasn't really a full-on cruiserweight debut earlier in the year, but he finished the year officially moving up to cruiserweight, and he got a knockout win. So him just coming onto the scene in a wide-open division with not a lot of big names, I gave him number 3 honors. Number 2, I went with reigning IBF champion Mauricio Lara. He took on a guy named Arthur Mann, was his only defense, but there was nothing really else going on with the top guys, and Mauricio Lara is the number 1 fighter in the division. He's earned that right. So for me, the knockout of Arthur Mann got him number 2 honors. But number 1, without question, undefeated WBO champion Lawrence Okolie. Okolie was impressive. He destroyed Krzysztof Głowacki, the former two-time champion, destroyed him in March, laid him out flat on his back, and retained his title, or captured the title, his first title. And then he made a mandatory defense in September against Dejan Presovic, who was undefeated, and he destroyed him in 3 rounds to retain his belt. So, Cruiserweight of the year, Lawrence Okolie, the WBO champion. Now, Heavyweight of the year honors. Number 3, I gave it to Dillian White. He only fought once, but it was a revenge 4th round dominating TKO victory over Alexander Povetkin in their rematch as he regained the interim championship for the WBC. Big time win right here for Dillian White. He had to prove that he was the better man and a legitimate top 5 contender, and he went out there and dominated Povetkin in their rematch and stopped them. Number 2, I gave it to Tyson Fury. It was hard to pick, but I gave it to Tyson Fury. He only fought once, but it was an epic victory and a knockdown, drag-out offense, or with Deontay Wilder in their 3rd fight, and he ended up scoring an 11th round knockout, and that's number 2 for me. Number 1, Alexander Yusick, the unified heavyweight champion. He only fought once, but it was a major victory, scoring an impressive unanimous decision over Anthony Joshua to become the heavyweight champion of the world, the unified heavyweight champion. That was a monumental win for him, and for me, that made him the heavyweight of the year. But also another one I want to throw out there is Javonte Davis. Davis fought at 2 different weight classes, 140 and 135. He moved up to 140 and defeated Mario Barrios in a great fight to capture a secondary title there. And then he moved back down to lightweight, 135, and he took on Isaac Cruz and walked away with a hard-fought 12-round unanimous decision. So I want to throw his name out there for doing 2 weight classes, that made him a candidate. But the top 10 now, my top 10 fighters of the year. Number 10, Stephen Fulton Jr., the WBO, the unified super bantamweight champion. Again, his wins over Angelo Leo to capture his first world title in January, the way he dominated Leo, and then the way he landed the cleaner, harder shots and got a hard-fought 12-round majority decision over Brandon Figueroa. Impressive. He's number 10 on the year, Stephen Fulton Jr. Number 9, I gave it to Devin Haney, the WBC lightweight champion. His wins over Jorge Linares and Jojo Diaz were just impressive. They really were. Impressive wins, especially since he hadn't fought anybody on that level, even close to it, and to come out and beat 2 quality lightweights in one of the best divisions in boxing. I got lightweight now at number 2 overall. That was impressive. Devin Haney, number 9. Number 8, Oscar Valdez. He went 2-0. Monumental knockout, dominating performance and knockout victory of Miguel Berchelt. Might have been a little higher if he would have fought a more notable name other than Robson Conceição. struggled in that fight. There was some, issues about him testing positive for banned substances that also hurt his case. But, that win over Burchelt really was awesome, and he gets number 8 on the year. Number 7, I went with Brian Castano. He went 1-0-1 on the year, but he dominated Patrick Teixeira in a fight that a lot of people thought was going to be close. He dominated him over 12 rounds to capture his first title. Then he came in underdog against Jermel Charlotte and seemingly outworked him. He got hurt a couple times. He did lose the championship rounds, but he seemingly outworked him over the entirety of the fight. And the judges, came back with a draw. But to go in as the underdog and pull an accomplishment off like that, when Charlo was the name, the favorite, everybody was saying that Charlo was gonna accomplish the goal of Undisputed, and to upend that was impressive. So Brian Castano's number 7 for Fighter of the Year overall. Number 6, I gave it to Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor only fought once, but he accomplished a huge goal, becoming the undisputed junior welterweight champion at 140, defeating the very game Jose Ramirez. So that was number 2 honors, or number 6 honors for me. Number 5, George Camposos Jr. Huge upset. He only fought once. Huge upset over the top dog at lightweight 135 in Teofimo Lopez. That's not an easy feat to beat the top dog in one of the best divisions in boxing, and Camposos pulled off that upset, won the championship rounds. I gave him number 5 for Fighter of the Year. Number 4, Terence Crawford, also only fought once, but scored an epic 10th round TKO win over a former 2-time champion in Sean Porter, a very game fighter, and always at the top of the division is Porter. And Crawford had to work harder than expected, and he defeated Sean Porter, who had never been knocked out. He's number 4. Number 3, Tyson Fury. Only fought once, but knocked out Deontay Wilder and sealed their rivalry with a kiss in history. This was a huge win. Laid him out, face planted him. Huge win. Number 2 for Fighter of the Year, Alexander Yusick. Also only fought one time, defeating Anthony Joshua, but it was a great historic victory for him. And he dominated the action, outboxed Anthony Joshua impressively, and became the unified heavyweight champion of the world, number 2. But without question, number 1, Canelo Alvarez. He went 3-0 this year, and he accomplished his goal of Undisputed. To fight 2 times, you could question some of his wins. You can compare against a guy who only fought once. But to fight 3 times, to have that extra fight, and, people are going to knock him for the Avni Yildirim fight, but he had to take it. It was a mandatory fight. It was part of the agreement to get the shot at the vacant WBC title against Callum Smith last year. In order to fight for that title, he had to agree to fight Avni Yildirim first. He did, and he laid him out in 3 rounds. 3 months later, he comes back against Billy Joe Saunders and breaks his orbital bone. Stops an undefeated 2-division champion in Saunders impressively in the 8th round. And then followed it up in November, took on a good boxer in Caleb Plant and dominated him, broke him down, stopped him impressively in the 11th round, became the 7th man in the 4-belt era to become an undisputed champion, and became the first Mexican to become an undisputed champion in any era. Huge win, 3-0. Absolutely, your 2021 Fighter of the Year was Canelo Alvarez, the pound-for-pound king, and undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. So that's it. That's my final award. I hope you guys enjoyed it. True Boxing, you've been hit with the truth. Oh, and pay attention for my top 10s because they're coming later this week. Thanks, guys. Bye.